Hey everybody, this is James P. Wagner here with Local Gems Press. Although today I'm here with Hobby to Hustle, which is just nice little thing about helping people learn how to turn the things that they love, their hobbies, into a hustle or into something that can count either as a part-time job or in the good case scenarios a full-time living. Basically, doing what you love. You know the old adage: if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Well, that's not strictly speaking true, because there's plenty of days that I work, even though I love what I do. It is still work, but it does make the work a lot easier when you love what you're doing. That's for sure. And when you believe in it, and you find joy in it, it definitely helps you get through the hard times a lot easier. Because when you're working really hard on something that you don't love, yeah, that's that's just kind of the worst of both worlds in that regard, or whatever. But yeah, so hobby to hustle. This is a old thing we've been doing. Telling people all those stories and doing some coaching and helping people on how to do that. We've done a bunch of seminars, courses, things like that. That really popular and people have been getting good results with it. And one of the things that we basically do in a lot of these seminars is we kind of tell our story, or I tell my story in particular about my hobby to hustle journey and how I actually turned a little hobby that I had with $460 into a six-figure business. And people really like that story. So just here today to kind of recount that in this video. So I don't have to keep on repeating it over and over. No, I mean, I'm going to end up repeating it anyway in the seminars, but anyway, here you go. So this is basically my hobby to hustle story. Yes, my hobble to hubble story. No, my hobby to hustle story, where I turned $460 from a part-time job into a solid six-figure a year publishing business, which is Local Gems Press. Also the Dog-Eared Bard's Bookshop, which I'm currently sitting in right now in my office, which I own, which is owned by the publishing company and all that. But yeah, let's get down to the beginning of that, and that's yeah, pretty much my hobby was poetry. I've been a poet. Well, I guess that's debatable exactly how long. I guess it depends if you're going to judge the quality of the poetry or not. Because I could say that I was a poet since I was like six. That's open for interpretation. But I always loved writing, creative writing. Fiction and poetry was a really big one. I kind of started taking it a little bit more seriously when I was in high school, obviously, and of course through college. I mean, my undergraduate was in creative writing, and I actually, at the time that I started this publishing company by accident, which is another funny thing. They say, "How did you start a publishing company by accident?" It's like, well, I'll tell you. I wish I could say that when I was four and they asked you, "What did you want to do for a living?" It's like, I want to be a poetry publisher. But I probably said something stupid like astronaut, something like that. But so at the time that this happened, I was actually in graduate school, and I was studying to be a college professor. I was in a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies. I had two concentrations. One was in literature and one was in social sciences, but my undergraduate was in creative writing, and so I was on track to become an English professor. Um, until I wanted to be an English professor full time until I became an English professor part time, and then I realized that yeah, there's a lot more to the professor thing than, at least at the time that I was doing it, than actually professing. There was a lot of in department politics. There was a lot of committee meetings and a lot of stuff that you kind of had to do that really didn't actually have anything to do with teaching. And plus, being a part-time college professor was not good. You're not salaried. It's basically a part-time job that you just do. A lot of times you try to put in as many classes as you can, and some of them, you would work at multiple colleges at the time. I was at, I went to my grad school and all that stuff at Dowling College, which sadly is no longer there. It was a private college that was on Long Island. That's a whole other story. But I enjoyed my time when I was there, especially as a student, and the few years after I was a student. But at this particular time when I started it, I was, in graduate school studying to become a college professor. But I was also part of a lot of the school clubs or whatever. The poetry club was one of them, and also history club, drama club, things like that. But really, we had a spoken word poetry club that was, really really cool. And for my time there, it emphasized a lot more on performance poetry. But I also had a lot of experience with the greater Long Island poetry scene that I've been going to since I was in high school, open mics, etc., like coffee shops and things like that. And so I also was writing for a little online hyper news local thing called theexaminer.com. So I was the Long Island Poetry Examiner, which was kind of like my second part-time job at that point, because I was getting paid for writing the articles, but not a lot. I was getting paid like a cent per click from advertising. So and I would get maybe like 100 reads on every article I wrote. So I wouldn't get like a paycheck and for like 2 weeks and it'd be like $75 or something like that. It was I mean, still more than a lot of advertising does now, but it wasn't lucrative by any means. My real job was working at Dairy Barn, for those not on Long Island, a drive-through convenience store. This was before, you had, Uber Eats and delivery being whatever. It was basically a convenience store that people could drive through on the sides and get milk, bread, eggs, and all that stuff or whatever. But that was my part-time job while I was in graduate school and doing this examiner thing. So at the time, I had this kind of dilemma, which was I wanted to get like all the poets from these two different groups to meet each other because I had like my college poetry experience and then my greater community poetry experience. And, I was in good with a lot of them, but I didn't really have the poetry street cred that I kind of do now as like a poet laureate and all that stuff. So I would tell them about each other, be like, yo, there's this group at the college. You really got to come see them. They're really good performers. And all the regular community would be like, oh, yeah, yeah, sure. That's great. And they would never do anything. All the college people were like, oh, yeah, we'll go to that thing. And then they never would. So I sort of had this idea, what could I do to get them into the same room together? And I came up with the idea that, if I took all their poems and I put them together into a book, they would have to come out because they would want to get the book and they'd also want to celebrate being published. Um, and that's a picture of this right here is the examination anthology because I didn't know what the hell to call it at the time, and I was a Long Island poetry examiner, so I just thought I was being clever with examination anthology. And that cover art was actually just a photo taken by an ex girlfriend of mine at the time. I think I gave her like $20 or something like that. So maybe technically this whole thing cost me 480, or maybe I didn't even give her 20. Maybe I just gave her a free copy of the anthology. I don't know. Whatever it was negligible, but so I started gathering submissions for this anthology. I got it on a local newsletter. I gathered people from, my friends from the poetry club or whatever. It ended up being 39 poets in the anthology, which at the time seemed like a lot. Nowadays, I would consider that a very, very small anthology. But back then, 39 poets, it was like, wow, this is going to be a lot of poets. So, and then the thing was, how are we going to get this launched? Like, I actually had experience formatting books from when I was in high school because I self-published a bunch of crappy poetry collections of my own. Sadly, there's one still in my high school library. That's a whole other story. But so I knew how to actually format the book and get it printed and all that stuff. This was back in 2010, so it was a little bit more complicated back then than it is now. Not too much more complicated. It wasn't like the overlays and the heavy printing stuff that you needed to do like 20, 30 years ago. But at the time, it was like there was maybe 1 in 100 people who actually, among the writing community that actually knew how to do the proper formatting and all that stuff. Nowadays, it's more like 1 out of 12, so it's still rare, but it's not nearly as rare as it was. And there weren't nearly as many like YouTube tutorial videos and all that stuff how to do that back then. So the fact that I knew how to do this was actually a hot commodity. And the funny thing is the formatting was pretty bad. Like I look back at like the inconsistent formatting in this first book compared to now, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, and I really didn't know what I was doing, other than just the basics. But got the 39 poems, put them together into this book, and then of course had to get the book printed, and that's where the $460 came from to print an additional print run of 75 copies. So not a very big print run, but I was doing it in my head. I was thinking like, well, that's almost twice as many as the poets in the book. They're all probably going to want at least one, maybe some of them will want two. And I figured that we sell out the first print run, I'll order more and all that because this was sort of like during the start of print on demand era. I know you've probably all seen lots of videos about print on demand now, but it wasn't exactly like literally down to one back then. Like these days, you could basically sign up for a thing and print one copy and get that. Back then, it was more like in blocks of 25, 50, things like that. So there were kind of minimums, but they were really small compared to what they used to be. Because like 20 years ago, it was like minimum 500 copies to print something. So it was more affordable, but yeah, so basically, this was money I saved up while working at Dairy Bar, my part-time job while I was in college, and 460 was a lot for me back then. Well, first of all, this was 2010, so really that's closer to the buying power of about 900 now, because this is 2025 when I'm recording this. Um, but yeah, that was like 3 weeks paycheck back then, pretty much. So it was actually a lot, but I also knew that I would kind of get the money back or whatever because we sold the book for $15 or whatever. But yeah, that was pretty much how the first thing started this first book in this business, and the other benefit of being part of the college was I was in with the spoken word club, so got the officers or whatever to agree that we could launch the book at Dowling College in the ballroom, and here's a picture there of the ballroom. Um, the setup that we kind of had for launching the book or whatever. We also like the club sponsored like free pizza or whatever, so people got to eat. They came out, and that's me behind the podium back then in 2010 before I had all the facial hair and all that stuff and was much skinnier. But anyway, So we did that. It was a great event. 50 something people came out, which in poetry, especially back then, was like Woodstock. And I mean, a lot of the events we do now get way more than that, but back then that was a lot. And people read from the book, and people bought the book, enjoyed the pizza. It was great. They got know each other. My little scheme of getting the two groups together into the same place was successful, because now people couldn't ignore each other. They were all in the same book together. This person wanted to go to this person's event, back and forth. It was great. And then people started saying, this is great. When's the next anthology? And I'm like, the next anthology? Well, you mean I have to do another one? So, at the time, like, my plan was really just to do the one, just as an excuse to get them together. This is why I say I accidentally started a publishing company, because that was not my intent at the time. I had thought that maybe I would start like maybe a magazine that came out every so often or something like that, but I really didn't have any kind of a plan. So the fact that there was this like immediate demand for another anthology was just like, oh wow, people really want this. Um, so we ended up doing another anthology. The first one was general. This one was actually a one with a topic, and that was perspectives, poetry concerning autism and other disabilities. And the reason that we did this was because I had a friend at the time, Mark Rosen, who has sadly since passed away, way too young, but he co-edited this with me, and he was the Long Island Autism Examiner. While I was a Long Island Poetry Examiner. So we had two outlets to go with, the poets and the autism community. Which I'm also a part of the autism community. He was definitely part of the autism community. And, so we got a lot of submissions for this. We put together this book, and this is really the one that really put it in perspective, pun intended, because once this came out, it went gangbusters, like in a way that we weren't expecting. Because again, this was 2010, so social media like existed, but it wasn't as big as it was now. So the idea of like artistic advocacy or whatever you want to call it, if to assume something as grand as that. But it went pretty. We sold a lot of copies. Let's put it that way. We got invited to, uh, doing some podcasts or early versions of podcasts like Blog Talk Radio, which existed back then. Um, we got invited to tables at conferences, at like autism runs and walks, to have tables there. The groups bought like blocks of these books to give out as raffle prizes and things like that. They had us present. EJ Autism Foundation, like JCCs started having us come out and give talks. Autism groups in Canada started getting us to, come on the radio and talk with them or whatever. So this book went, really wild, and sort of opened up the floodgates, and sort of, I guess, put local Gems Press on the map, so to speak. Um, and one thing that I say in publishing to a lot of the clients that we coach now is that it's not really your first book, it's your second book that kind of determines your trajectory. And this was the second book, and that really did determine the trajectory. So that sort of showed us like just sort of how big a need there was out there for poetry about specific topics, and also for just the communities that formed around the poetry things. Because at this time, it was like, I mean, there's more of it now than there was back then. There's still not a ton of it, at least not really hyper organized or in a way that really is consistent. There's a lot of groups that'll pop up, and then they'll kind of be around for a couple of years and go away. Um, but back then in particular, it was like you had high school art and lit mag, college journal, and then there was pretty much nothing except literary magazine. So there wasn't really like, any stepping stones between that and the big league. So that'd be sort of like if the next step after Little League was the New York Yankees. You didn't have any community ball or community games or anything like that. And so we found that there were a lot of people who would kind of, you know, maybe stop writing, or they would write but not know what to do with it because they didn't really know the next step. And that's sort of where we ended up going further. And that was community anthologies. And in that second year, we started one on Long Island called Bard's Annual. This is our 15th year of that, which was sort of like in the same vein as the Examination Anthology, except now we actually gave it a name and a history and a legacy. And then, publishing partner of mine, or a friend who became my publishing partner, Nick Hale, he moved to Northern Virginia, and they didn't have an anthology like that down there for a poetry community that he was trying to organize. So we did one down there. And then it became, we started, libraries started actually contacting us to give sort of lecture tours about publishing and, how to go about publishing. And one thing that we tried to tell people in a lot of these was, look into your community anthologies or your community poetry publications. And one thing that we heard over and over and over was, we don't have that. We don't have that around here. I don't know where there's one around here. And we would try to help them research that, but we found that in a lot of cases they really didn't. Like some places did, like Washington D.C., New York City. Like there were some places that had like some established stuff, but a lot of places really didn't. So we kind of started basically doing community anthologies in a lot of places that didn't have them. And so like we have, Massachusetts bards, Connecticut bards, Maryland, Delaware bards, Pennsylvania East and West bards. We do book launch events up and down the entire East Coast. This was actually just a picture here from the Walt Whitman 200 convention that we did for Walt Whitman's 200th anniversary, and those are just some of the books that we have there. I can actually see on there like Laurels, which is Long Island Poets Laureate, The Bards Against Hunger 5 years, the Suffolk Review, Connecticut there, Apprentice Bards, which was actually for students. So these are just some that I'm recognizing off of just looking at that picture. But so basically, we started fulfilling the need, and then we started fulfilling the need more and more because the need was in a lot of different places, and it kind of just grew from there. So, that's sort of like the story, but how did the business itself build? Just some of the money particulars away, because I know a lot of these stories they talk in vague terms. I mean, I'm not going to give like concrete details of every dollar here, but I'm going to give you the general ideas. Like, how did the business build itself? Well, again, the original investment was $460. Which became $1,125 when all 75 of those copies sold. And I did actually order more copies than that. Um, I don't actually remember if the second print run sold completely, but I did do a second print run of 75. But I'm just going off of the, just as an example here. Let's just assume the original 75 was the whole thing. That's 1125. So I had a profit of 665 from the original investment. I got my investment back plus $665 that I didn't have before. So now, granted that, I mean, more than doubled my money, so that was pretty nice. Of course, not going to retire on $665, but it meant that if I wanted to do another anthology, I didn't have to put it out of my own pocket because we had this money right here. So that became seed money for more projects. And then actually in that particular case, Perspectives was the next one. And then Mark's father invested a little money to get us some more copies. But basically we went through this thing of, turning the profit from the anthologies into more anthologies, either buying more copies of the next one to keep on selling them or seed money for new projects. And so one project became two became four. And, so, even just doing the math on that, like, 665 times two times four, starts to become a little bit more. The cycle just kind of kept repeating itself. We would take, profit, seed money, make more profit, more seed money, and then eventually actually started pulling some money for myself out of it. Because in the beginning, I took very little money out of it because I was reinvesting to try to build this stuff. Like I would basically buy myself dinner or something like that, but I was still working, my part-time jobs for several years when this started in the beginning, and it was kind of snowballing and kind of just, putting a lot of money back into this stuff. And that's something that I think a lot of businesses sort of don't do right in the beginning, is because a big part of it is the compounding effect. And, it's really tempting to take a lot of the money and do whatever with it. But when you want to build something, reinvesting is an important thing, because that's how you get the compounding effect that eventually is paying dividends over time that, then you could start taking money out of it, and it's not really going to hurt your investments because there's more coming in than you can kind of keep up with. But generally speaking, that was the simple factor of it, was taking the profit, building it, and, going forward, which is pretty much how all businesses should work. Whether they do, well, that's questionable. Um, and yeah, again, after doing this for a lot of years, eventually we opened up a bookstore, sponsored by the publishing company, Local Gems Press. It's called the Dog Eared Bards Bookshop, which I'm sitting in right now doing this video. It's in East Northport, New York, which is the town where I grew up. And we have our own little event space there, so we do book launches and things like that, where we're independent, used, and antiquarian and vintage bookshop. So we deal in like some old books, and obviously the independent books are the ones that we publish, and some local authors and things like that. But it's been a great hub, for the stuff that we do. We have, again, a lot of book launch events here. Half the time it functions like a warehouse and a shipping station, because we're always turning the event space in the back when it's not actually having events into a shipping factory for all the anthologies that we do everywhere. But yeah, it grew that much that we were able to open up a bookstore, and it's been absolutely great. And yeah, so we publish internationally now, which is funny because the publishing company is called Local Gems Press, which was the name back then. And the people are like, how do you call it local when it's you're doing it all over the world? It's like, well, we started local, and also we focus on local everywhere we do. I mean, we do have themed anthologies and things like that, stuff for causes like Bards Against Hunger, but a lot of times it's like, Maryland bards, Texas bards, Florida bards, even in the UK. Buzz and Bards, Manchester, UK, where it's an anthology of all people from Manchester because the bee is a big symbol that they have there, or Nova Scotia, like Misty Coast Bards, things like that in Canada. So we do about 25 anthologies a year. That's actually a conservative number. Sometimes it's more than that because sometimes we do themes with the local stuff. But we do events up and down the East Coast. Actually, like the day after tomorrow, I'm traveling out to Pittsburgh and Ohio for book launches out there. And we even do them in the UK and Canada. We do some on the West Coast as well, though we're more heavily on the East Coast. But yeah, basically, it all started from $460 was again the original investment. And that's the main thing that I want to convey here, because that's sort of what this is all about. Is talking about hobby to hustle, and this all started from my hobby of poetry. But the big distinction, of course, is that I want to say, and this is something we get into in the seminars and all that. It's not my own poetry that created the business. If all I was doing was selling my own poetry, I would be broke. I'd be still be working at Dairy, but well, I couldn't be working at Dairy Barn because they went out of business. But I would still be having stuff like that, or maybe I would still be stuck being a full time college professor, and I wouldn't be happy about it once I knew what it entailed. But the thing was is that I learned how to take my hobby, my love of my hobby of poetry, and make it beneficial for other people because. Really, it all came back to a skill that I learned in high school that I taught myself. So I didn't even need to go to college. I didn't need to spend $120,000 on my, my wonderful piece of paper. Although I'm glad I did because I met my wife there. So obviously some good came out of that. Made some great friends there. Had good times, all that, and like I did enjoy what I did in college. But I didn't learn the skill. I learned a lot about writing and stuff there, but I didn't learn the skill, which was book formatting and book printing. I taught that to myself when I was in high school, and that became the thing that was really valuable because I applied it to the needs of others and fulfilling a need, that needed to be filled. And I mean, maybe needs a strong word because I guess nobody needs a poetry anthology, but a lot of people certainly like it. A lot of people feel fulfilled by it because we've had a lot of people who were like, I wrote 10 years ago, I haven't done anything with it till I saw this call for submissions. I came out, I shared this stuff for the first time. It gave me ridiculous confidence. It made me feel really fulfilled. We get stories like that all the time. So maybe it's not a need, at least not a visceral human need, but maybe it's a spiritual need. The point is that it was for other people, and that was sort of how it became what it was. And um, I know a lot of videos of this type out there try to talk about, well, all I did was this and this, and look what I was able to do. Like I'm gonna dispel with that right now. It wasn't a get rich quick or anything like that because it wasn't a quick thing. We did turn $460 into a solid six-figure a year business, which again, six figures in poetry, seems like an oxymoron. But that didn't happen overnight. The first several years, like again, I wasn't even taking any money out for myself. I was still working other jobs. It wasn't until 2017 that I was actually doing this full time. So that was 7 years into it. But yeah, for the last 8 years, this has been, my full living. And again, it's been a solid six-figure a year plus business. So it built a foundation and it's growing every year. It's going to keep on growing, at least I hope. But that's on the trajectory because we're always adding more projects and more things. Bringing new people in because I'm about at the capacity of everything that I could do when it comes to that. So yeah, not taking it as, oh, all you have to do is this and there's that, but with hard work and dedication, which again becomes a lot easier when it is something that you love and you're passionate about. Yeah, a lot is possible. So that's pretty much my hobby to hustle story. I've told it in a lot of different shapes and forms. This is about as complete as I could kind of make it while sitting here talking about that. Hopefully, you got something out of it. Hopefully you learned something, or maybe it was some kind of inspiring. Um, I wish I could have told myself this all the way back then because again, it was unexpected. But really happy with how it turned out. That's how I started a publishing company by accident, and yeah, it's also why I always say like, yeah, that a lot is possible because again, 3 weeks paycheck from a part time job, and look what you could do with it, which is some elbow grease. So yeah, that's all for me today. Again, James P. Wagner here in the Dog Eared Bard Bookshop. Thank you for listening, and I guess we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.